In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the beginning of the book of Genesis that we're going to be looking at today. And that is really a mantra of Western religion for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and many of the other religions that follow. This idea that God is conceived as the creator. So here we have this mantra, this simple sentence, these 7 words, which we can take as the Bible in one sentence. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, in Hebrew. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we're going to look at the text in more detail. The first thing we can say is that there is a controversy about this text. Is that a single sentence, those 7 words, God created the heavens and the earth? Or some like to translate it, when God was creating the heaven and the earth, there was emptiness and tohu vabohu, etc. So they take that first part, verse 1, as saying not a simple sentence, but as a dependent clause. So there is a lot of debate. There's actually a lot of debate about how we translate that first sentence. But theologically, we can look at it as this statement that God is conceived as the creator, the maker of all that is. Heaven and earth is all that is. This does not have to be the way to conceive of God or the divine. There are other aspects, but this has become a central, key theological starting point for Western religion. Back to the very beginning. In the beginning, God created. And I want to look at the word for God that is used in this text. And the word is Elohim, Elohim. This is one of the many words for God, for the divine, in the Hebrew Scriptures. Elohim is plural in form. The im at the end makes it look like a plural. But it is a singular, so this is not God's created. This is God. And we know that because the verb bara, that means created, is singular, meaning one person created. So we're going to look at a lot at this, the names of God, Elohim, and the word bara. Bara is created. But in biblical Hebrew, only God baras, only God creates. So even when we try to translate it into English or any other language and we say creates, well, humans can create, gods can create, computers can create. But for the writers of Genesis, whoever they were, bara is only an action that the divine can take. So if we tried to put it into English, it might be something like God miracleized the universe into existence. So Elohim bara, God created. Elohim is one of the many names for the divine, and it is more of a general, universal name for the divine that other languages, other peoples would see the El as meaning the divine. So let's read one translation. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. So, here we have the beginnings of a really great creation story. What we have first is this formless void, tohu vabohu, wilderness and waste, I think of like an empty desert with nothing in it, and just a total void. And God's wind or God's spirit, ruach, that word can mean many different things. And in this darkness, God says, let there be light. That's a tremendous image for creation. Yihi or vayihi or. In Hebrew, it's very poetic because of the way the language works with the imperative, yihi or vayihi or. So this is the idea of just this darkness and formlessness and emptiness, and then pure light, an explosion of undifferentiated light. Another important aspect of this creation story is that there is no pre-existing material. There's no stuff or pre-matter or anything really. It's just emptiness. In many other creation stories, the divine is conceived as using some sort of materials that are already there. But here in this story, we really have something very close to a creation out of nothing, where God is fully responsible for making and creating all that exists. There's no other stuff there. And the problem with having other pre-existing stuff is that then you have to explain that. Who created that? Why is that stuff there? But here we have a very different perception of the divine. There's close to absolutely nothing. It's just tohu vabohu, just a dark emptiness. And then God just creates light. And God does it by saying. Why is that important? Why is it important that God said it? Because saying is very close to an act of the will, an act that a person just states. It's not that God had to use his hands or tools. It's just the power of intention, of just saying, let there be light, and there is light. Another aspect that makes this creation story so powerful and so effective theologically is that there is no theogony. There is no story of how God came into existence. In many other creation stories, there is a theogony. There's several gods who choose one god to create, and there's battles. Or you have gods who procreate and produce a baby god that grows up, and so on and so on. And after a long lineage, that god finally creates the world by organizing matter that's already there. Here, no, we have one God who seems to be in complete control of all that exists. This one God faces an absolute emptiness, tohu vabohu, this dark emptiness, and God, who has no beginning, there's no account, God is this eternal God, creates. And that's very different from many, many creation stories. So that adds to the power of this story and the theological significance. This is, I think, a very advanced concept of the divine. And let's proceed in more detail. In each of the days of creation, there is something specific that is done. And you may not have noticed this, but in the first set of 3 days, there is an arena that is created, a field that is created. And then in the next set of 3 days, that field is populated with beings. So, the first day, light is created. And the second day, the heavens and the waters are created. And then the third day, dry land is created. And then in the next 3 days, those areas, those fields are populated. So for example, the first day, there's the creation of light. Then In the fourth day, that light is made into specific bodies of light, the sun and the moon, for example. So that is part of the logic of creation here. So this is not accurate according to modern science. The way that the ancient Hebrew conception of the world works was that there was waters below the earth and above the earth. Well, it was correct. There are waters below the earth. There's groundwater, but I think they meant something more substantial. And the ancient Hebrews thought that there was water up high because that's where rain and hail and snow come from. So the idea is that there's this firmament, was the old word, this dome that was created to separate the two. So that is part of the worldview at the time. It's not scientifically accurate. I think we can mention that and accept that. But in order to read this as a story, we should realize that there is this logic of 3 days of creating of a field and 3 days of populating that field. So here's the second day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Now, yes, the waters hadn't been created yet. They're sort of there. This idea of the primal waters. This water is such a great metaphor for undifferentiated, formless matter. And many creation stories start with water. Water is also very necessary for almost every single form of life that we know. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So in the Hebrew way of counting time, the day ends at sunset. And that makes sense. The day ends there because light has gone. So that's the end of the day. So if that's the end of the day, then that's also the beginning of the next day. So the beginning of the day starts after sunset. Now on to the third day. And God said, and Elohim said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. I want to pause at that statement, God saw that it was good, because that is critically important for this creation story. The world that God creates is a good world. And that might make immediate sense, but it didn't have to be that way, because many religions conceive of the world as this battleground between good and evil. So the world is not itself conceived of as good. So we will look at this through the book of Genesis. What does this important word good, goodness, being good, what does goodness mean? Here it means God is giving a stamp of validation upon God's creation. God created all that is. God miracleized into existence the heavens and the earth, everything. And since it is the result of God's action, it is good. The world is good. We can participate in the world knowing it is good. Now let's take a look at day 6. In this day, God creates the animals of the earth, and God says that they are good again. Again, that positive reaffirmation of existence, of reality as good. And then God makes human beings. Verse 26, then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the earth." What is this our? Why is God saying our? Does this mean many gods are creating? No. what most likely scholars are suggesting is that God in heaven has this divine court of other beings, and they are not really described here. In the book of Job, we do see Shatan is one of them. So it's a divine court, just like an earthly king has a court. So this is the idea here, that God is talking to these residents of heaven, whether they're angels, Shatan, or possibly other gods. We don't know that here, but they're not mentioned. It's just said God is going to make human beings in the image of a divine being, of a heavenly being. So that is also very theologically important, because in other creation stories, human beings are created as servants for God, to bring worship to God, to bring food to God, to build God's buildings on earth, to build these temples and palaces, and to give glory and be slaves to a divine being. So here again we have the positive affirmation of creation. Human beings are in the likeness of the divine. There is something divine about the human spirit in this creation story. And now let's take a look at the seventh day. On this day, God rests, and God blesses this day and hallows this day, makes it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So the seventh day is very important because it's a day of rest. And one of the theories behind this whole story is that it was written by the priestly class. So this could be a priestly document, this first story. And what was critical for them was to make the seventh day holy. So people would go to synagogue, to the temple. And in a sense, you could read this as sort of a sociological power play, that the priests are really wanting to validate this 7-day cycle. The ancient Hebrews probably got the 7-day cycle from the Mesopotamians when they were there in exile. So you could read this creation story. Why 7 days? Because it matches with the religious needs of the priests. And then this story, this source ends most likely in the middle of verse 4. And then the second story will start with the rest of verse 4. So you'll see verse 4 divided in many modern translations. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. And then we start really the second story. So the first story ends in chapter 2, verse 4, halfway through verse 4.